Welcome to A Rare Reality, a podcast powered by Jordan's Guardian Angels. I am Christina Janes, Director of Outreach and Awareness for JGA, and I'm so lucky today to be joined by Kara Ryska with a special needs moms podcast. And Kara, this has been a long time coming. Our project director, Carol Backhouse, came back from Global Genes and said, "You have to have Kara on this podcast. She is amazing." So thank you for joining us and spending some time today to talk to us all about what you do.
Well, I don't know who wouldn't like that introduction. So thank you so much, Carol. Right back at you. It was so incredible to meet you. And I'm honored to be here today.
Tell us a little bit about Special Needs Moms podcast, because this is a really special place for many people in the rare disease community and in special needs community to really come together.
Yeah, so I started the Special Needs Mom podcast. I mean, I don't know if I would have said it at the time, but ultimately it was the podcast I wanted and couldn't find. I came from a lot of different things, but in the last 6 years, as I became a coach, I came from more corporate, working in, women in leadership kind of thing. And really that's kind of where my coaching was for many years. And then it was through a series of events that I really got crystal clear that the community that needs coaching the most are special needs moms. Because it's interesting, when I'm a coach, that's kind of the perspective I bring to my podcast. You can really coach on any topic, right? So whether someone's trying to increase their revenue and improve employee morale, or whether they're trying to manage doctors and appointments and their own life, it's all actually the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think ultimately I was like, I have to do this. Like, I need this. Mm-hmm. And didn't have it. And that's ultimately why I started coaching special needs moms, because there is now, I will say there is growing. Certainly I have offerings, but I see other stuff coming up, which I think is tremendous.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the communities are growing and coming together and kind of saying the same thing. And if you hear the blower in my neighbor's yard, please apologize to all of you who are listening, because of course, does it always happen this way?
Always.
Yes. So I find that, it's so funny because this community is small, but it's mighty. And so many moms need a place to go, to a place to find an outlet. And it's a special place to be. It's a special place to have these conversations and hear what you need to hear and what you want to hear, and have those hard conversations too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So tell us about your journey to being a special needs mom. How did you get here? Tell us, about your family.
Yeah, so I am the mother of 4 children. They're currently aged 15, 13, 10, and 5. It's kind of weird to have like a teenager now. I feel like, whoa. I remember looking at moms being like, whoa, they have a teenager. now I do. Actually, I guess I have 2. But way back when the teenagers were 4 and 2, my son, who was 2, so my son Levi, was diagnosed with craniopharyngioma, which is a rare brain tumor. Mm-hmm. And this particular tumor, it's real low on the malignancy spectrum, so it's not going to spread through the body, but it's in a real tricky spot. And so many of the kids and people, mostly it's pediatric, that have this type of tumor end up with a series of rare diseases as a result. The way that it impacts the brain, what it takes to keep somebody alive often comes with its collateral damage. So after his first surgery, he was left with partial blindness, hemiplegia. So half of his left side was heavily affected. So he actually lost the ability to walk at that time. And we didn't really realize it at the time, but significant behavioral challenges that come with brain impact, as well as a condition called panhypopituitarism, which essentially means he does not have a pituitary or a working one. Well, he actually doesn't have one at all. And so this has a variety of kind of subdiagnoses that go along with it, that it's almost like, the way I describe it is that he is manual, where we are automatic. So, when you get sick or are stressed, your body knows exactly what to do, and his does not. So we really have to give it guidance along the way. Mm-hmm. And we're very fortunate so far. We've been very lucky. However, with a few near misses in terms of not managing it in the way that he needed. So that's kind of the medical picture. And, you know, we we spent some years recovering from that initial surgery. When you have a child that is, typical in every way, it takes a lot to recover when you were just never expecting. So there's both the actual physical recovery,
Mhm.
and then there's the emotional. And I would say the physical recovery much easier than the emotional. And I didn't mention, but I think it's important to look at the picture. I was also 10 weeks pregnant with my third son at the time of Levi's diagnosis. So I was going to have 3 children under 4, and now a child who was significantly disabled and very medically complex, and a newborn. So, I mean, the first year, definitely, probably more like 2 or 3, I was just surviving.
Sure.
I was just, and for me, surviving actually looks like thriving to a lot of people. And I want to clarify that it's because when I am stressed, I have a high capacity to operate, right? So I can still get my kids to school. I can still, I mean, and that's kind of not even a great example, but I can still operate in life at a very high level. So still hold down a career, still kind of basically keep life going. And that part happens to be easy for me, but the emotional life and processing the grief, that part was a real struggle for me. I really didn't have any of those tools, like at all. And like I said, like I was operating, I survived it, I got through it, and we got to this point where kind of, I would never say life was back to normal, but we kind of had our new thing going on. And I think increasingly, for a variety of reasons, I really just was like, I don't feel like I'm really living anymore. Like I'm existing, and it wasn't like my life was altogether awful.
Mhm.
I still had a great marriage. I love my kids, and there was a lot good. I actually even enjoyed my career that was fulfilling and rewarding. But there was just this missing piece for me. And I think for me, what that was the emotional recovery, the kind of getting back of myself that I lost along the way, because it took that kind of narrowing of focus to survive, right? So it's almost like I had tunnel vision. And like I said, outside looking in, that tunnel vision had me functioning at a very high level, however, missing a lot. So ultimately, that's kind of what led me into becoming a coach and kind of exploring that part of my life that I think prior to becoming a coach and getting into that personal development world, I don't think I had any idea how lost I was, which is okay.
Yeah.
And then I would add to the story just to kind of juice it up a bit,
Yeah.
as if we needed that. But this last year, so actually right around this time last year, this is October at the time of this recording, my son had recurrence. So this was very unwelcome, but not altogether surprising news that he had had regrowth.
Mhm.
We scanned regularly because this is known. But I'll say that I really was blindsided. Even though I mean, we did scans every year, I had such a high degree of belief that everything was going to be fine. It's kind of how I deal with worry, is that I said, I will worry when I need to,
I have to
but at
agree.
this point, I'm not going to spend my energy worrying. And so I did such a good job with that it just was so shocking when I got the news. And honestly, the news came across as in an email late Friday afternoon where, I don't know how many of you have read radiology reports of the brain, but let's just put it this way. There was a lot of words. I had no idea
Right.
what they meant. But I did see enough to know that it looked like we had tumor regrowth. And so I'm sure you can just imagine
Well, and then you spend the weekend waiting to talk to someone to try to figure out how to decipher what this means.
yeah. And this was not one that we could wait. I was like, no, I need to talk to somebody. And so literally I spent an hour calling everybody at the hospital that I could think of. Finally, I got through to somebody in like audiology. I don't know how I got there, but this woman, was kind enough to realize that I was desperate to speak to somebody and that she would figure out how to page the doctor. Because I think I figured out after hundreds of calls that the department was not open for the day of what I needed to get to. And so I did get to speak to a doctor, one that we were familiar with, and to just kind of get some options to be, because of course my brain's going to the worst case scenario. He's going to have a craniotomy like he did before, which honestly was, I'll spare the details. It was horrible. I mean, it was a 2-month hospital stay, from the impact of his surgery. And so certainly didn't want to do that again. And the only other option my brain could come up with was death. So those two options seemed pretty bad. And so I got to talk to the doctor, which allowed me to cool down enough to be like, okay, it could look like this and it could look like this, but it kind of took those two extremes off the table for at least the weekend until we could get into the doctor. But I will say something, and I don't know how much your listeners would relate to this, but it was very different having a 2-year-old going through this than it was having a 12-year-old. He was 12 at the time, go through this, because 2-year-old, he's just going along, and he's desperate for help, and so he was very compliant. And then having a 12-year-old that I'm going to have to deliver the news of, oh, guess what? This is what's happening. It was pretty hard. It was really, really difficult, and
And
definitely, yeah.
he definitely knows that there's that this is, and he's been through it before. He may not remember it all, but there's something that's still residual.
Oh yeah. No, he knew at a pretty deep level what this meant, and I think, yeah, he knew the severity of it. And I think we have done. I'll add just to kind of, because I think it would be beneficial to any mom. We have done significant therapy over this last year, both for myself individually, which is actually, this is funny. I was at the point personally, it was actually at the scan where we ultimately did learn that he was gonna, he had recurrence. But I was at the scan and I noticed a couple things as I was walking through the halls. And I thought, oh, you know what? Like, I think these are trauma responses. I think it's time that I kind of, go address those to a higher degree than I already had. So I like called around to some therapists and I was like, all, proactive and like, oh, we're going to clean this up a little bit. It's going to be great. And so by the time I actually got to the therapist, I was like, so about that recovering from trauma, I think we're going to have more work to do than I realized. So this is what's going on.
We're here.
Yeah. Yeah. Just wait for it.
Yeah.
And so, but anyhow, I mean, I tell that story because I'm so thankful that I had so many resources for support. And I can go more into that if that's helpful, but I had so many people that were supporting me that I think one of the things that I was really present to early on was that I never felt alone. And I think that's significant to say here because the number one thing I hear from moms is, I feel alone. Nobody understands this. And so it really stood out to me because I thought, wow, like for me to go through this horror and to not have that experience, like it clearly did not make the horrible experience better. However, it wasn't like an insult on injury. It wasn't like two double awful. It was just the one I had to work through. And there was something else I was going to mention. And therapy. So additionally, to support my son through obviously, pretty traumatic surgeries, we engage with a therapist for him as well. And actually, I kind of sideline with him. So I actually sit in his sessions with him, supporting him. And it's just been a really beautiful experience to, one, see his growth, but to see the value of spending the time and the energy and the money. I mean, I can't even imagine if we hadn't done that. And I mean, I have to admit, like, it's hard to spend the time and the energy and the money because we do it after school. And I'm like, I'd really rather not do this right now. Like, I don't want to, but we have an appointment.
Yeah. The benefit as a whole is such a
The benefit, yeah. And it, and the money, it's like we do a monthly budget and I look at the money going to therapy. It's over $1,000 a month that we are currently paying for therapy. Now, I do have some tricks for getting a large portion of that reimbursed from insurance. And so that's awesome, but I don't count on it because, need I say more about insurance?
To go back to your point though about moms feeling, in this realm feeling alone. I think a lot of our moms would that resonates with them because this is such a small community, and for so many, before we had 310 families, we had 5 families or 10 families, and our first family conference had 25 families, and so many of our parents said we went to the doctor, we did X, Y, and Z that they told us to. We finally get this diagnosis, and they say, here's a piece of paper. There's a
Good
Facebook.
luck.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Literally, those were the words. And so I think that moment, we hear this so often. We just brought everybody together in July. 65 of our families came.
Mm,
And they said, the feeling of having everybody together, having these reunions, knowing that you're not alone, knowing that your kids can also make those connections because they can see that you look like me, and all for our new families. I mean, it was just incredible, but you are not alone is really something that is so important to this entire community. So I think that's really something that, is beneficial for them to hear again and again and again, for all of us to hear.
well, yeah, and I think I'll add a little bit on that, just kind of from like the coaching perspective, because I think it's really interesting, especially if I just use myself as a little bit of a case study, as I just shared about, so proudly, is like, wow, that initial moments, and even just, those really intense months of this last year, like I didn't feel alone. I felt so known and understood and supported. However, that doesn't mean I always feel that way. There's certainly been times, and usually it comes for me when we're getting big behaviors.
Mhm.
When we're having big behaviors, those are the moments that my brain's like, nobody would believe this, or nobody else is having to deal with this, or some variation of that. And so, and I think it's so important because that's actually not true. There's actually a lot of people that understand what it's like to have a child who, how I describe it, as who's physically violent in the home. And I don't know if that would be consistent with your community, but I think anybody that has a child with a difference, I think, can go to that place where it's like nobody understands this, like whether it's medications or different protocols or all the different things we have to do for these children in terms of managing their medical care. That narrative leads us to then feeling alone. And I think so that's why it's so important to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, I feel alone. Why? And then to start questioning it, and really asking, is that true?
Right.
And in some cases, maybe you could say, yeah, actually, it's true. I live on an iceberg in, I was going to say Alaska, but I think they're somewhere else. Antarctica. I always get the top and the bottom mixed up. Wherever there are icebergs
Yes.
is
You
where
may live
you
on
live,
one. Yeah.
and you don't have internet or phone.
Yeah.
But I think especially, and I think it's, again, it's also, I think it's really important to learn how to get what you want from different communities. And it sounds a little bit like self-serving, but we're going to just go with it because I've talked to other, parts of my community, and they're kind of talking about support groups in a way that actually didn't make them feel better. They get in a support group, and it's their experience is everyone just kind of complaining about what's going on. And they're like, no, I actually want to like feel better. I want to get help. I want to move forward. I don't want to just stay here. And so I would just say that in that case, maybe that's not the group for you. Or I'll say also, like we have a craniopharyngioma group
Mhm.
that I go to at various points for support. Now, did I indulge and overread that page when I was preparing for surgery? I did.
Yeah.
Was it helpful? No, it was really unhelpful.
Yeah.
All it did is add to my worry. We already had a plan. We had a plan for surgery. And so to go to the group and then to question myself and be like, oh, maybe we should be doing radiation, which we ultimately did have to do, but it just wasn't helpful. And so that's why, again, you have to like back it up a little bit and be like, okay, I'm feeling really scared. I'm feeling really fearful of the future. I would say, well, what are you filling your mind with?
Mhm.
Like what's behind that that has you feeling that way?
What's your
Does that make sense?
Yeah, what are you taking in?
Yes.
What's on your phone? What's on your computer? What are you
Yes.
what are you looking at? What are you staring at? Because it can change your entire outlook. It can,
Precisely.
what are you ingesting? It's not just the foods you eat, it's your environment too.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. Going back to the behavioral aspect of this too, because I think that some of our families experience behavioral issues, if you will. Um, but how difficult that is to know. And I think what you had said was when you're parenting a certain way and then this happens, how do you reconcile that? How, it's like, am I doing the right thing? What can I do to change that outcome, or is there anything that you can do? And it's a very tough place to be as a parent.
Okay, that's a really good question because I think it puts us on this very slippery slope of am I doing enough?
Mhm.
Right? Because if you are doing X and your child's still having behavior Y or health condition Y, then you could suggest to yourself, well, X might not be enough. I might not be doing enough. I didn't research enough. I don't have the right doctor, etc. And what that will predictably lead to is a very tired and discouraged mother and a kid that's, maybe a little bit better or worse than they would be otherwise. And not to say that advocating and being a fierce warrior for your child is not the thing. It's being attached to the result of what you're producing.
Mhm.
I'll break this down a little bit further. So there's a saying that I actually is so helpful to me, and I kind of share it with everybody I can. And it's something along the lines of you're responsible for teaching your child, they are responsible for learning.
Yeah.
And we could change that a little bit to say you're responsible for medically advocating for your child
Mhm.
and they're responsible for healing or whatever word we would use. And I know that seems kind of weird to like put that on a child, but I guess what it's suggesting is that you just don't have control. You do not have control over how different treatments impact your child, how they respond to medications. And sometimes when we try to take control with what literally is not controllable, it'll also lead to overwhelm, anxiety, chaos. Like all these things are very, very, very common in the special needs mom experience. And so, but I want to add a little piece to that. It doesn't mean that you don't advocate, right? It doesn't mean that you don't push and continue. It just means that you don't have to attach it to the result. And this allows mothers and, of course, fathers too, but I love working with moms. It allows you to have peace, it allows you to have rest
Yes.
because you can actually look at who you're being. Okay, I'm being, amazing in terms of advocating for my child and getting what they want or teaching them how to behave. And just because they're not behaving yet and or they're not where you want them to be milestone wise or medically, it's I don't mean to say this like heartlessly, but it's none of your business.
Mhm.
And like really separating the two can just be so valuable because it just is it's like letting yourself go from being held hostage by what's happening with your
Right.
child.
Well, and that's the thing I think is that if you can put that on a shelf, if you will, and understand that the evolution is going to happen in one way or the other, but it's not necessarily a reflection on you,
Yeah.
and life will be a little easier, for everybody involved too. I think that's the part of it. Um, I also think that you've said in a podcast or two that moms need to take a minute. You need to put on your own oxygen mask so that you can um, take care of yourself. This element of self care. So many of the moms like, I don't have time. I'm not. There's no way. There's not enough hours in the day. I'm fine. But if you fall apart, then a lot of other things fall apart too. So how do you balance that? How do you put on your own oxygen mask?
Well, I think one of the things that really helps me is not expecting that I will always feel like it,
Mhm.
not expecting that it'll be easy, even though I know it's good for me, and not even always expecting to feel better afterwards.
Right.
And I have a good example actually. So, yesterday, actually, I don't know, a week ago, I had scheduled a massage for yesterday afternoon.
Yeah.
And we got to yesterday morning, and my daughter was a little bit sick, or a lot bit sick, actually. She stayed home from sick with a fever. And I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave her. even though it was just a short amount of time with my teenage son. I was a little bit worried for her because she was like really lethargic. And I just didn't want to take the time. I had other stuff I wanted to do that felt in the moment that they would be. I have a big project at work I'm doing. And it felt in the moment that it would be more relieving and satisfying to stay home and do that thing than to go spend, in this case, an hour and a half nurturing my body, my physical body. And so I think for me, just normalizing, okay, this is not a surprise. I know it's hard for me to take time to myself. I'm committed to doing it. Like I literally would have probably had to pay a cancellation fee or, pay for it if I didn't go. So that structure of accountability, super helpful. If I didn't have that, if it was like no consequence, I would have canceled.
Mm-hmm.
I would have just been like, sorry, not going. So I think just saying like, okay, like it's okay to have it still be difficult. And then I would say, it really comes down to a value conversation. We put our time, our money, and our energy where we value. So you see this in a special needs mom, right? She puts everything into her son or daughter. And that's because she strongly values that child. And that's a beautiful thing. What I think it unfortunately exposes, though, is the lack of value for herself. And or perhaps, if there's some marriage distress, like perhaps a lack of value of the relationship. And so I think sometimes it requires undoing a lot of default beliefs
Mm-hmm.
about what it takes to take care of ourselves, and even just if it's okay. So this is interesting. I was just meeting with a client that I've worked with for at least a year and a half, special needs mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about a gal that I had met previously that was considering joining the coaching group we have. And I said, yeah, unfortunately, her like right now there's just a little bit of a financial gap. And so she's putting it off. Actually, the wording was specifically, I spoke to my husband and we've decided to wait. And my client said, honestly, I don't think I would have done it. I don't think I would have said yes when I did, except for my husband said, you have to. And so she did. And my theory is, because I see the pattern, right? I see someone reach out for coaching and say, yeah, I want to do that. Like 100%, they're in. And then there's something that happens between them getting off the phone and them talking to their husband, and then they don't show up. Like not like they ditch me, right? But they don't show up for themselves. They, decide that they don't have the money. And again, I want to honor that, like, I know the resources it takes to raise these kids. And there are some situations where you'd be like, yeah, actually, it doesn't make sense. We have to eat and we obviously want to pay for their medications. But there's a lot of room in between there, right? Where we just say we don't have the time, energy, or money, right? So whatever it is, whether obviously in my examples coaching, or whether it's massage, or whether it's going on a walk, or whether it's journaling.
Fills you up too. Yeah.
So there's all the different things. And I mean, I think also self-care has a real bad rap because I think so much effort is on like things like massage or on meditation even or like bubble baths, right? That's kind of the joke these days, right? Like
Right.
that I think is the smallest, not smallest, that's not the right word. I think it is caring for yourself in a way, right? But I think it is probably in most cases not what special needs moms need in terms of actually caring for themselves. I think what really helps look at the lens of self-care that I'm typically looking at, and that is it's almost described as like self-love,
Mm-hmm.
and more even also like I lost my train of thought, but really it's not the physical part, it's actually more soul care.
Yeah.
Like how can you take care of your whole being, because this gig that we have in parenting it's mind, body, and soul. Like this is not just we need someone to go rub out the kinks in our back. This is like a lot more than that. Although I needed that too.
That helps. It does help. But no, I think that that's the thing, is that it's not like you get to take a shower and wash your hair and maybe spend 15 minutes by yourself. That's not, yes, it is self-care in some ways, but
Exactly. I mean, I guess it's in a category, but I mean, that's like That's like,
physically
it's called
self-care.
personal hygiene.
Right, that's the
It's
thing.
not
It's
self-care.
also necessary. But it's so much more than that. It's that whatever you need to do to go and find a minute and reset for yourself so that you can reset for your family, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, and I want to speak again to like how uncomfortable this may be. And I think it's mostly uncomfortable because it is going to be swimming upstream from a how we are taught in society to be.
Right.
There's a moment that I remember driving around, and I don't know why. I mean, I remember exactly where I was, but I remember how I was feeling, and I was just feeling like really great. Like I had the time and the energy and the money I needed. I don't even know if I was going to work or an appointment. I don't know where I was going, but at the time I had a nanny who was almost full time. I mean, that's an investment. And I remember just thinking, why aren't more people doing this? Like this is so amazing. Because I'm hearing the narrative, right, of like, moms at school and all the things like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, like, oh, I'm so
Right.
stressed out, like all the things. Like you don't hear moms bragging ever about, gosh, I feel so calm
And fulfilled
and fulfilled.
and rested.
I'm having a really fun time.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that from a mom?
No, not usually.
No. No. And that is, I think that's what I'm saying. Like we, for some reason, have learned to accept such a low standard for ourselves. And so I think, so back to this moment, I was driving around thinking, and I remember thinking, I was like, I kind of thought, am I cheating? And I was like, maybe I'm doing something wrong, which is hilarious to think like I actually was having this moment where I'm like, wow, my life's working really well. And I then, because I was
Like that.
so different
Mhm.
than everybody I saw, I thought I must be missing something. There
Mhm.
must be something wrong with me because nobody else is happy. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to steal your interview to say, um, that's why I think it's so important to be in community, because in community, we see people doing things that we are not. And in some cases, it's actually like, the not feeling alone thing, being like, okay, like actually, okay, they do get this. I'm not alone. But I think there's also things where, and I think this is especially powerful, like for people that have chosen to work with me, is that they share. Yeah, if anybody else would have told me that, I wouldn't believe him.
Mhm.
But because I know you actually understand where I'm coming from and you're telling me it's possible, I'm willing to listen. Like so for me, like being an example of what's possible is so important. Because for us women, I mean, this is a, we see this everywhere. It's why we're supporting communities of color to actually be in leadership positions so that somebody younger than them can see and be like, oh my gosh, it's possible.
There's representation. Uh-huh.
Representation,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think that's why, like, we don't have women, very very few. If I ask them, and it's hard for me to answer this question too, if I say, hey, can you think of a mom who you want to be like or you think is happy, there's nobody to say. And so I'm like, that's kind of a problem, right? Like,
I mean, I think that that's where this conversation and so many conversations like this are vital because you can blow open the barn doors and say, listen, like, we're going to talk about this and we have to talk about this. And everybody needs to listen and know that you can be on a path to change.
yeah.
Things can change and it's okay. It is okay to have help. It's okay to ask for a minute. Do what you need to do for yourself for a second.
And then to normalize that when it feels uncomfortable, then that's also okay.
Mhm.
Like, I think sometimes we think, oh, if we're doing something good for us, we should feel good. And that's not always a direct correlation. Sometimes, like, the discomfort of taking the time for yourself is still so great that you don't yet enjoy it, that it's like a muscle to grow, that it actually, your capacity to have expands too. Your capacity, right? Because we're talking about like we all have such little standards, right? And so there's actually like a weird type of discomfort that comes with having the opposite or having something different than what we're used to.
Absolutely. So valuable. I mean, I think before I keep you on here all day, because I'd like to, because I think there's like 9,000 topics that we could cover here.
I could probably do that with you.
Keep going. But I want to, and maybe we take this further in another time too, to talk about all of the different outlets and really like dive into them. Um, but what is your message for our moms who are listening right now? Our moms who have found this community, who, it's relatively small and it's worldwide, and they find the commonalities together. But what's your message for them that they really, something you really need them to hear? One of the most important things that you could convey to them today.
I mean, I think I could answer that question with equal conviction, probably thousands of different ways. But the thing that just is on my heart when you ask that, the thing that came up was judgment,
Mm-hmm.
and this is self judgment. And what I hear so often from moms, and I'm of course guilty for this as well, is the way that we blame ourselves or talk to ourselves or just literally unkind to ourselves. It's just heartbreaking. And judgment is one of those things that it's like the glue that binds being stuck together. And if and when moms shift to love, compassion, grace for themselves, right? This is an inside kind of job that I mean, here's the thing is like, whether you're judging yourself or not, there's some real hard circumstances that come along with being a special needs mom, right? Like it's really hard. And nothing necessarily can make that easy. But if we stop the judgment and introduce the idea of true compassion, it just, I don't know, it does really change everything. And it also, I mean, it just changes everything for yourself, but it dramatically changes the way that you show up for other people. And, it's one of those things where like my heart is always to help the mom of the relationship, but the byproduct of when we do this work for ourselves is it always benefits this child that is being supported, right? And so I don't know, that's just the thing that comes up that I see and just can make someone feel so stuck. When you're judging everything that you're doing, when you're saying it was my fault, when you're saying I didn't do enough, when you're saying and this, because when we judge ourselves usually we're pretty quick to judge other people as well, and then that of course has an impact on the relationships. The doctor didn't get it right, and not to say there's not opportunities to look at both things, right? But it's just through the lens of judgment, it's just not helpful.
Mm-hmm. So powerful. And I think that, like I said, I think there's much more to come back to on all of this and much more to talk about. If I'm going to link your podcast for our families as well, so that they can dive down that rabbit hole and really take a listen to what you have to say too. If there's an interest in coaching, or how do you get involved in something like that, so that I think when they hear about this, that they may want to learn more. Is there a good place to send them?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. It's actually a great time because given that last year was pretty unexpected, I kind of I didn't have any new offerings. I kind of pulled back from offering, and it just kind of maintained what I had, and spent the whole year dreaming about kind of what I wanted to see for the community that I have. And so just this month of October, I've launched the new program. It's called Pathway to Peace, and it has all the things. It has community, right? So community is front and center, but it also has group coaching, again, in community. And then of course it's almost like just to expedite the learning of some things that we discover in coaching, but I have, recorded trainings and modules to it's almost like learning a new vocabulary when you start coaching. And then of course a bunch of other fun things that I'm having in as part of that. So that is how I'm supporting moms at this time. And the best way to find that is actually just reaching out to me. So I can give you a link. I don't actually I do have a reach out on my website.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easier just to be direct. So I'll give you my contact information that you can put in the show notes for anybody that wants to find me. And then also my website is kararyska.com. So for any reason you can't find the show notes, you can always reach out to me. And, I'm pretty much a one-woman show. So you'll get to me. and I'll take
100
care of
phone
you.
calls with you, just straight to you.
Yes.
It's perfect. Kara, thank you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. And I look forward to talking to you further because I think your message is powerful. And the message that you can send to our families is incredible. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, again, it's my honor, and you can tell I get pretty passionate about this. Like when I get going, I really get going. And so, thanks for the opportunity. I just think there's so much potential for moms like us, and I'm here to be alongside them and help it happen.
Love it. Thanks, Kara. And for all of you who are listening, if you want to listen to our other podcasts, we're on all the major platforms, also on YouTube with translation services for our families all around the world, and on our website to watch, jordansguardianangels.org. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.